morning. Can I have my slides on the screen? No? Right, first off, how many of you don't understand creation at all? All right, 3 people. So the whole conference is just for you, basically, right? Yeah, I've been called different names, especially on the airports when I'm late for my flight. For instance, Mr. Board your plane. And I'm like, that's not me, right? So majority of my talk will be about how do we cover people who are not speaking our languages, right? But first off, if you have any problem, I mean typographic problem, not other problems, you can reply me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to help you after the talk, right? In 2005, I developed a first version of Type Tester, which was a tool for testing typefaces. And since then, I've been studying typography and learning about type and answering all kinds of support questions about how to use typefaces, etc., etc. So this talk is basically based on my experience working with people and the problems that they have, again, typographic problems that they have in their work. Last year, we decided to expand it a little. So we eventually created a full-fledged browser-based application for designing websites, of course, with an accent on web type. You can test it on preview.typetest.org. If you haven't, it's still free. And if you have any question or whatever feedback, it's really much appreciated. I also run a small web design UX consultancy in Velika Gorica. There's 4 of us. We specialize in corporate websites and in e-commerces, all that high-level stuff. So in a way, typography for me is still a hobby. It's not my primary responsibility in the company. So probably that's why I love it so much, right? I'm also one of the editors at Smash Magazine. I also contributed in the Smashing book number 4. I work with them a lot. So as you can see from this series of commercials, I'm pretty booked all the time. But I also occasionally take a vacation, right? Wait a minute. No, that's my wife's. This is mine. Right, so this was taken one morning when kids were still asleep. We have 3 kids. And this picture was taken on the last day of the vacation. And you can see the difference between this mood and this mood, right? Because these guys have to go to school now. Why am I presenting my kids? Because this guy here is kind of central to my story. So when he was 5, I sold him an idea that computer games are the current game. The online current game is a computer game that everyone in the kindergarten talk about, right? And he somehow bought it, and since then he's playing kerning games and typographic games online, and he really enjoys it. I mean, look at this feast of victory when he succeeds, right? And when he was 9, his teacher asked me to give a workshop in his elementary. So this is the result. His name is Luca. Especially this one is pretty cute because we taught them how to use as little ink as possible to achieve as big characters as possible, right? And then some year ago, he came to me with this idea of a new logotype for a museum. So he kind of connected 2 of his loves, which is Lego bricks and typography. And again, this is an example how whether you're a developer, you can embrace some design thinking, or if you're a designer, you can embrace some development thinking and create something really extraordinary. And what can I say in the end? The font is strong in my family, sorry. Anyway, like every other person that has this illness, an eye for typography, I too go crazy when I see an arrangement like this, right? So you have a Comic Sans here, because, I mean, this is for field trips, right? So it's supposed to be funny. So you can justify the use of Comic Sans. And you can justify the use of different typefaces because every trip is different. There's about 6 or 7 typefaces here. But what I really cannot understand is this dot over here, right? What's that? Is it like, think twice before you dial that number? You know, should it be a pause? Anyway, when I was so, full of myself, how I know to how I learned to recognize bad typography, I went to school last year, which was Reading University in the UK, and that's me. And I learned a lot there, even after all these years. And what's really striking is a couple of books that I found in their library. One of them is Pentagraphia, which is basically a library of all known writing systems in the world. And they use this manual to better spread Christianity around the world, right? So in a way, when I found I realized that UTF is basically nothing new. We are reinventing the wheel because they already had a system how to, spread information to whichever system, right? And another thing was that I found a lot of small books that are even set in smaller type than 16 pixels on your iPhone. Again, Christianity, but this time, basically we weren't allowed to read anything other than Bible, so printers had to create really small books so you can hide them in the pockets, right? Again, nothing new. We had small type, we had UTF. Many things that we reinvent now in web design are basically just old stuff for traditional typographers. So, my point is that whether you're a webmaster, web developer, web designer, web editor, whoever, you need to have some basic knowledge about typography, because with typography we shape information, and especially for WordPress, the first part of the name is the word, and word is basically made of letters, right? That's why I think it's super important for everyone to kind of scratch a little into typography. And I'll give you an analogy. So you have people who build instruments like violins or pianos, and then you have people who compose music, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have performers or artists who perform the music that somebody else composed on an instrument that somebody else built, right? So in a way, we can draw an analogy, because in the end, all of us can basically create music, right? Even though we are not musicians. So let's have a quick game right now, all right? So free your hands, free your feet, and repeat after me. Clap. Again. Louder. What song is this? Exactly, so we know how to play, right? Great. The same thing with typography. Somebody else designed it, somebody else created systems, and there's no obstacle for us to simply start using it, all right? So what do I have for you today? We have preparation as a starter, we have some selecting typefaces tips as a main course, as well as paragraphs. Then as a salad, I have text hierarchy, which is basically how you decide what size your headlines should be on or at. And in the end, I have tabular data for core developers among you. So, the thing is that every browser renders typography by default in a different way, right? Some use paddings, some use margins, some use borders, etc., etc. So you can deal with this in three ways. You can use a framework, which is nowadays a big no-no because it brings an overhead, and performance is really, really important nowadays, especially on slow internet connections. The second approach would be to just rely on the browser default styles and then override them as you need it. And the third approach, which is my favorite, is to reset everything. And it's not because I'm a control freak, it's not. It's because in this way you actually know what's happening in the browser, right? You know what's done. And if something's undesigned, you know, you can clearly see it right away because it's really ugly. So I still use this margin 0, padding 0 CSS line that actually resets everything, all white space on the web page, right? And then I start designing each element from the bottom up. Another tip when you're starting out is to reduce the contrast, because in print the light falls on the medium and then reflects and goes into our eyes, right? And on the screen you have background light, so the light is coming from the medium. And that's a big difference. So even though you have to provide high contrast, especially for people with poor eyesight, you don't have to have black on white or white on black, right? So you can always hack it a little bit. So use light gray on a dark background and dark gray on a light background. So here's a quick test. Again, the same slide. Can you see the difference? Yes. But the first time around you thought this was black on white and white on black, right? So the difference is so subtle that you don't see it, but it really helps when you're reading long passages of text. So the next thing is how to select a typeface. And since we have about 20 to 25 minutes slots, I don't have time to actually teach you how to select a typeface, but I can teach you how to avoid poor typefaces. So this is wrong on so many levels, right? I mean, not only that they used inappropriate typeface for the context, right? But take a look at this space here. It's so unproportional to this one. It's unbelievable. Anyway, the most important thing when selecting typefaces, especially on the web, especially for the international audience, is if the typeface can support all these languages. So for instance, if you're building user profiles, you know that people will generate some content. You have different kinds of characters, special characters like Eastern European characters, not to mention Chinese, Japanese, Korean, etc., etc. So you want all these names supported on your website, right? So that's the first thing that you have to take care of. So that's why free fonts that you download and embed in your pages are not a good choice, right? Because they usually don't have anything other than Latin 1 character set, right? Another thing pretty useful for judging typefaces is how kerned they are, right? You know about kerning? Yes? All right? So kerning is spacing between two letters. And you can obviously see, you can clearly see that this one is not correct, right? But when you judge kerning, you actually have to take triples into consideration, not pairs, right? So this V should be in the center between A and I, right? Not you don't just judge this pair. And since our brains automatically recognize the meaning of the word, we kind of skip it, and we're not very good at observing the proportions. So there's a simple trick, and you can basically impress your designers with this, is to turn the typeface, the design upside down. And now your brain is not automatically assigning any meaning to the word. You know what it is, right? But you have to rationally read it. It's not subconscious. And it's much easier to judge kerning. So let me give you a quick exercise. How would you kern this C here? Anyone? To the right? Okay. And then what will happen with an I? Because now NIC is correct, right? So what do you do with an I when you move the C to the right? Anyone? Then you move it to the right, then the next letter, and then eventually this V will fall into its place, right? The important thing when you're kerning is that you keep the last letter and the first letter where they are, and then move everything in between. That's correct kerning. So in this case, you don't move the A towards V or C or S outside, right? You just keep them where they are, and then move everything in the middle. That's pretty cool because not many, even educated designers know about this trick. And here's another one for you. I'll give you 10 seconds to try to figure it out. So again, E is staying, L staying. You have a pretty cool picture about it, right? O goes to the right, B goes to the right, etc., etc. So if you're if you really want to master recognizing good typefaces, you have this game, type.method.ac, and you can play it to your heart's content. And hopefully you'll avoid errors like this. All right, so serif or sans serif. In history of web design, we use sans serifs because we usually set type at 12 pixels, and if we had serifs, they wouldn't render properly on our low resolution screens. But now we set typefaces at 16 pixels, and we have much better screens. So the tiny little details like this one, or this one, this one, can be rendered properly and are legible, right? So that's why we avoided sans serifs, not because they are kind of poor choice for readability. Both are equally good, right? For instance, the New York Times, Zeit Online, Le Monde. This is especially useful when I talk at international conferences because people see that in every country, basically the biggest newspaper now switched to serif font at 16 pixels. So no reason for you to avoid it. But sometimes we can cut corners. For instance, when we have tabular data and when we have units that we can compare vertically. So you can use sans serif because serifs usually add horizontal stress, right? So if you have something, some kind of data that you want to compare vertically, then sans serif is probably the better choice. Then again, if you have something that has to be read, then serifs are much better, especially if you have tight lines, because you can clearly see how strong is the baseline here, right? And it literally draws your eye down the line. But sometimes we forget to take a step back, and that's why I like this quote, this decision. So basically what Elliot and Whitley did, they took a look at the ads that they have, all the navigation, everything around, and then they decided that if they used serif typeface, it will create too much noise. So basically that was just an instinctive gut feeling decision. Sometimes it's best just to take a look at what you have in front of you and simply switch one or another and try and test it. Okay, the paragraphs are basic unit of content. So if you've been around long enough, you probably know that there's a certain optimal line length. And it was coined by Robert Brinkhurst, who is the author of The Elements of Typographic Style, which is Typographic Bible. So if you want to read one book on typography, that's the one. But the problem that we face is that we can barely fit 35 characters on a mobile screen, right? So how do we design for that? Well, you have to know that there are three kinds of spaces inside a paragraph, which is line space, word space, and letter space. And line space is the biggest, so that means that you can tweak it more easily because you cannot make many errors here. If you start tweaking letter space, 1 pixel increase or decrease will probably break the layout. So that's why designers on the web are not used to tweaking letter spacing. We usually just tweak line space because it's much safer. Anyway, when you have a short line, short paragraph, for instance, mobile screen, even though 45 is much bigger than mobile screen, then you can have your rows tighter, right? If you have desktop resolution, desktop width, you can add more space to the line height. But again, how much is too much, right? If you can imagine bullets here when you're looking at your paragraph, then it's probably too wide, right? So it shouldn't look like a list of items. It should look like a compact, basically paragraph. So you set it a little tighter. But how much down you can go? Well, basically until your descenders and ascenders touch, right? So as long as they are not touching, or especially for the international audience, if you have diacritics, if they don't touch, that's basically the lowest you can go, right? Because if you have this in your text, it will be, it won't be legible enough. Anyway, for everything in this world, we have an app. So even for paragraphs, we have an app. It's at universaltypography.com by my dear friend Tim Brown from Adobe. You can tweak the values here, and it will throw warnings if you have breached some kind of typographic rule, right? So as long as you're in the green, your paragraph is looking good. Next thing, text hierarchy. How do you choose font sizes? So if you have just one headline and a short article, then it doesn't make sense to make an enormous headline. But on the other hand, if you have subheads here, then it really makes sense to have the main headline really big and then subheads a little smaller until you reach something that's basically the lowest level for the subhead. And again, something from the typographic history. This was invented in the 16th century, so 400 years old, believe it or not. Typographic scale. And you can basically use these values for instance, for a paragraph, H3, H2, H1, or whatever from this scale. And it will always look harmonic because they tried it and tested over the centuries, basically. Then when you're comfortable with it, you can devise your own. So for instance, this one is based on 1.5 increments. And again, the same guy, Tim Brown, this time with Scott Kellum, they built the modulscale.com website, where you can basically use different formulas to get your harmonic proportions. And then you can not only use these for headlines, but also, for instance, for the column width, for the height of the header, for the size of the image, etc., etc. And this kind of makes sure that the layout is harmonic. And then finally, if you're really not into learning about it, I wrote a blog post for Adobe explaining all different kinds of, and all different possibilities with CSS, how to style subheads. And if you visit the demo page, you have really like about 40 options to choose from. Next thing, data tables, because developers usually work with data tables a lot. Sounds familiar, right? Or not? Who doesn't remember this interface? All right. This is like 3 years old, right? Something like that, 4 even. Anyway, developers work with tables all the time. Usually filters, checkboxes, select all, select none, search, etc., etc. And they basically build, Gmail interface over and over and over and again. So here's a couple of simple rules. The table by default has all these nasty borders, right? And the content in the table deserves the same treatment as any other text. So free it up from the cage, right? And you can do that by using border collapse property in CSS. You can use that by you can prevent that by using cell spacing property in HTML, etc., etc. The next thing you want to do is probably leave some horizontal lines, so the data has some kind of structure. But this really strikes me when I see that people don't use vertical align top, because if you read something from left to right, and you usually do, it's much easier if you just continue to the first line of the next chunk of data instead of traveling up and then down and then up and then down. So that's a very simple rule that will really improve your table. Another thing that really improves readability is to align all the numbers to the right. So you have singles under singles, tens under tens, etc., etc. And instead of having a default table, you can really have something that's really a piece of a group of data that's comparable to one another. All that's achievable with just a couple of simple rules, right? And on average, the basic typography CSS that we build is about 40 lines or so. So we specify paragraphs, lists, tables, headlines. What else? That's basically it, yeah. And it takes us about 40 lines of CSS to get all this basic stuff right. and then we design everything on top of it. So you can clearly see that typography is not something for creative people, or it's not that you walk in your backyard and something strikes you out of thin air and then you figure out the design. It's actually very rational, and you can use a lot of mathematics and you can use a lot of history to actually enhance dramatically your designs. So now we learn how to reset the CSS, how to improve the contrast or make it more subtle, how to select the typeface by recognizing poorly designed typefaces. They usually have bad kerning and they don't have all the characters that you need. You'll learn that we can tweak line height in a paragraph to increase it for longer lines, but also to decrease it for mobile screens. You'll learn that there's a typographic scale that you can use for headlines, and you know that you can free up your data from your tables. If you want to dive deeper, think with type, and explorations in typography have a lot of exercises. Of course, you can use typetester.org to test typefaces. And FontFeed is a really nice blog that explains typography in pop cultures, like movies, theater, newspapers, etc., political campaigns. So you can really learn why some typeface is used in some way, in a certain way. So the guy from the beginning, he's now 12. After years of playing with typography, he's now organizing his own exhibition. So I hope maybe some of you will get at that level that you're proud of showcasing your work. It was not like that in the beginning, right? So sometimes you really have to experiment. Just experiment and see if you can do it. Then when it works, make another try. And then go a little faster. And eventually, you will fail. But take it with a smile. Thank you.